Now, starting on the lower extremity, we will begin with the muscles. And we'll start on the posterior hip. And so this first muscle you've probably heard of before this course, called Gluteus Maximus. Maximus is going to mean large in muscle terminology. This is going to be the most superficial of the three gluteal muscles here. So the middle one is called Gluteus Medius, which is just underneath or deep to Gluteus Maximus. Just deep to Gluteus Medius, so the deepest of these three gluteal muscles is Gluteus Minimus. We're also going to talk about a muscle called Piriformis. And so in your notes, you should star this probably like 1,000,000 times. This is one of the most important muscles we're going to talk about in this region because it's almost like the key that will unlock this area. So with Piriformis, the sciatic nerve, which you probably have heard of before this course, drops out underneath the piriformis muscle in about 80% or so of people in the general population. Now, the other 20 or so percent, the sciatic nerve will actually split before it gets to the piriformis muscle, and half of it will drop underneath, and the other half will go right through the muscle or some variation before it rejoins. The sciatic nerve is a very large nerve, and when you are working with the cadaver, I promise you can't miss this nerve. It's a very, very large nerve. It's about as thick and round as your thumb, so that's huge, huge nerve. And it drops out underneath the piriformis, meaning when you trace it upward, right as it disappears, the muscle above this disappearance is the piriformis muscle. We'll also see piriformis be relevant when we get to the blood vessels as well in this chapter. So keep that in mind. In piriformis, its name translates to pear-shaped. Now, when we look at it, we may argue whether it looks like the fruit of pear. It's more of like a triangular-shaped muscle, but super important muscle to understand and get the hang of very early. It's a really critical landmark. Just inferior to piriformis, we're going to have our next group of three. So these muscles are going to work in a group of three here. And our first one is called superior gemellus, and this is going to be just inferior to piriformis. Now, gemellus comes from the term geminus, which means twin or paired, and superior is telling you it's above. So this is the twin that's higher up, and this also tells you there's going to be one below it as well. In between our two twins is a muscle called Obturator and Turnus, almost like it's internal to the two twins. Just below Obturator and Turnus is going to be our second twin, the most inferior one, called inferior gemellus. And these three are actually going to go to the same place through the tendon of the Obturator and Turnus. So they're all going to insert onto that greater trochanter. And we'll talk more OIAs when we're looking at pictures of these muscles. But they're all going to insert to the greater trochanter through Obturator and Turnus's tendon. And then our last one's going to be hanging out all by its lonesome, but it's called Quadratus Femoris. So this will be just inferior to inferior gemellus as well. And that quadratus is telling you it's four-sided or almost squared. Femoris tells you it's in the femoral region or the thigh. So this is the block-shaped or four-sided muscle in the femoral region. Now, looking at pictures here, our right side of the picture is going to be more superficial than the left. On the left, we've cut some of these muscles away. Our first muscle is that Gluteus Maximus, which we see right here is more superficial. Now, this muscle, you can see actually where it originates, and it's going to originate on part of the iliac crest here, on the posterior aspect of the sacrum, and also part of the coccyx down here. And this picture doesn't really do it justice, but it will also originate on part of the coccyx. We can follow its insertion as it inserts onto the gluteal tuberosity of the femur and also inserts into something called the iliotibial band. It's one of two muscles that do that. We'll talk more about that when we get to the iliotibial band. Now, what its action will be is extension and lateral rotation of this femur right here. Also, the nerve that will innervate or tell it what to do is the inferior gluteal nerve, and that is actually the only muscle inferior and gluteal nerve innervates that we will discuss.